Hey all, hope all is well. This is the fifth video in the Road to Grandmaster series. In this video, I'm going to go over my fifth round game from the Bay Area International, I played in early January. Now, if you followed the previous videos in this series, you know that I've started off really badly. I have 3 draws and a loss for my first 4 games, and I played down every single round. So I'm still in the doghouse. I haven't been able to put together a game where I just win cleanly. And when you're in the doghouse, you keep getting people that you should beat, and you're sort of just at risk if you don't beat them. So tough position to be in. Also, I'd just gotten back from the ER. I'd had a really uh, bad stomach problems, and I was just laboring, and so I was not at my best right now. And there was a real debate whether I should uh, continue the tournament and play the rest of the 5 rounds, or whether I should just withdraw and just take a break and just take it easy in the hotel for the next few days. And me being like a fighter, and like I was someone that sort of wanted to keep going and sort of play my way into shape, even if I was at 50%, even if I wasn't in my best health wise. And well, maybe that wasn't the best decision, but I really my flight wasn't going to be any sooner, so I was like, might as well keep going. So, anyways, onto this game. My opponent, Derek O'Connor, is a national master from the Bay Area, actually a full-time chess instructor, and I was white, so I was hoping to just give it my best shot. So I went d4, knight f6, knight f3, g6, g3, bishop g7, bishop g2, castles. The funny things about this type of system where black is fianchettoing is that you really don't know what black is aiming for until they determine the position of their d pawn. Because essentially, if the d pawn goes to d6, it's King's Indian. If it goes to d5, it's a Grunfeld. So I was really not sure what black was going for, and I figured, well, given that I wasn't super well prepared, I might aim for the fianchetto variation, which is a relatively solid option. So here, black actually played d6. Derek played d6, and that told me King's Indian. King's Indian fianchetto lines can be very sharp. Their black has a lot of little tricks that you have to know about. And I wasn't keen on playing a particularly sharp game today because I figured, well, you know what? I haven't looked at this in a while, and I could probably try to outplay him in a slower type of game. And so I went for a4, which does have a little bit of venom. The idea is that I'm not committing my setup, my development of my knight and bishop, particularly these 2 pieces on the queen side, and instead I'm kind of waiting for black to assume their strategy, and in the meantime, I'm sort of asserting that I might try to take more space on the queen side by playing a5. So Derek went for c6, and I was really happy to see that because after c6, it allowed me to play a5. And the thing is that c6 is a very natural King's Indian move. Normally in these types of positions, you want to play c6, then the knight to d7, and then the pawn to e5, and you get this King's Indian type setup. But a5, it does have some venom. And the point is that not only am I taking some space, but at some later juncture, a6 might be annoying to deal with. No, that didn't happen, but a6 might be annoying to deal with, and my bishop on g2 might exert real influence on this diagonal much later. So that's one idea. The other thing is that it kind of restricts black's queenside pieces, because the most natural move, you might say, or the move that you'd want to play with black to develop this bishop is b5. But the point is that now I have en passant, and you can't actually recapture with the a pawn because the rooks are opposing each other on the a file. So as a consequence, after queen takes, then white's rook has this screaming open a file, and black's pawn on a7 is isolated. And those are these little micro positional advantages that can work in my favor. So after a5, black went queen c7, and after queen c7, I went knight c3. And this is the other thing that was kind of interesting about this system is normally when you're playing a King's Indian type of setup, you expect white to have their pawn on c4, this pawn on c2 on c4. But I was really, really keen on just confusing the move warrior a little bit. And now the point is with knight c3, I'm actually kind of threatening to put my pawn on e4, and then it becomes an e4 system and not a King's Indian at all. So now it sort of becomes a perk instead of a King's Indian. And who knows if Derek is familiar with the perk systems? Maybe a lot of King's Indian players don't necessarily play the perk with black. They play against e4. They might play something totally different. So I kind of felt like I move ordered my opponent here. Because after e5, now I went e4, and now we get a perk setup, which is very different than King's Indian. So after rook e8, I went h3. The point was to just stop this bishop from coming to g4, the light squared bishop, that is. And, the nice thing about h3 is that my pawn on e4 is still indirectly defended, because if you go e takes d4, I have knight takes d4, and I still have the knight on c3 and the bishop on g2, both defending the e4 pawn. So it's not quite attacked just yet. And again, now that black might be lacking space, it's going to be difficult for black to develop the minor pieces cleanly. Because again, normally this bishop might want to come out to b7, but it can't because of that en passant I just showed. And if the knight and the bishop are both fighting for the d7 or e6 squares, it's going to be tough because I've played this h3 and walled off the entry point for the bishop on g4. So that was the dynamic there. So anyways, h3, knight bd7 was played. That's natural. Now I went for rook e1, and knight f8 was played. And I think knight f8 is a step in the wrong direction, because now what you can see is that both the knight and the bishop on c8 and the knight on f8 are both going to be fighting over the e6 square. And it's just a little bit awkward to move that piece to d7 and back to f8. It's not very consistent. I think a slightly better try might have been e takes d4, knight takes e4, knight c5, planting the knight there. Maybe a better try. But again, the black is lacking a little bit of space, and it's going to be problematic. So after knight f8, I went bishop e3, continuing my own development. And note how my pieces aren't really tripping over each other. They're really harmonious. The other thing about h3 that was really cool was that h3, pawn h3 that I played, indirectly covered the g4 square, also stopping the knight from coming to g4 and harassing me. So just little nuances. So now knight e6 was played, relocating that knight. And I think knight takes d4 was an idea here for black, because really black would love to trade at least one pair of minor pieces to alleviate the space disadvantage that black has. So for me, I decided, you know what, like when you have the space and that's like a chief advantage you want to have, you don't necessarily want to trade the pieces. And so I decided to play d5 and deny black that opportunity to trade minor pieces and challenge the knight. So anyway, d5 was played, knight c5, and then my e4 pawn is attacked, so I have a decision to make, and there are basically two choices. I could take on c5 and give black doubled c pawns and a passed d pawn for myself, or I can play the move that I played, which was knight d2, defending the pawn this way. And you might say, why didn't you take on c5? What was wrong with this? Well, there wasn't anything terribly wrong with it, but I think by playing bishop takes c5, I lose some of the positional trumps that I had, specifically the bishop pair and the space advantage. I still have the space advantage, but now it's very much double-edged, because here's the thing. I can't actually play d6 here. I know it looks nice, but the fact of the matter is that black would just go queen d7 and then put the rook on d8 and then put the bishop on f8, and there'd be no problems. And then this d6 pawn would be weak. And so I pretty much have to keep the pawn on d5. I could reroute this knight from d2 to c4, but again, still not entirely clear what I would do after that. And now black would have the long-term trumps by virtue of having the two bishops. And now, even though this bishop on g7 is sort of quiet now, it can be a monster later if it reshuffles itself to h6 or maybe even to f8. So I was just keen on some of that, and I felt that by playing bishop takes c5, the game would transform in a way where black might have chances. So because of that, I went knight d2. And now c takes d5 was played. And again, I don't want to trade minor pieces, so I played e takes d5. Note that if I played knight takes d5, then black would take, and all of a sudden this bishop would have a purpose. Oop, that's a bad arrow, but this bishop would have a purpose on this diagonal, and black might even consider playing a move like f5 and trying to get some counterplay all of a sudden in the center. So again, trading minor pieces if you lack space can be a huge benefit for you, and I did not want to give Derek that opportunity. So after e takes d5, bishop d7 was played, normal, trying to connect the rooks, and black actually beat me to the connecting the rooks, which is kind of an interesting thing, because I say whoever connects the rooks first probably has an advantage. But the point is I have a real nice space advantage here, and a good foothold in the center with my d5 pawn, which is really cramping black's pieces. So after bishop d7, I went queen e2, connecting my rooks. And then black went rook ec8. And I went knight b5. And the nice thing about knight b5 is twofold. One, I'm introducing ideas of putting my c4 pawn, my c2 pawn on c4. And two, if black plays bishop takes b5, my queen comes into b5 and I get the two bishops. So I'm just trying to take more space on the queen side, take advantage of my queen side pawn majority, and trying to get some things going. So bishop takes b5 was actually played, and I think that's a really big mistake. The reason it's a mistake is because after queen takes b5, not only do I still threaten to play to take space on the queen side with my with some type of pawn storm, now I also have the two bishops, which is a long-term positional trump that is just huge. Because after knight fd7 was played, black is trying again now to trade minor pieces and now play for f5. That much is clear. Black cleared the d7 square from the bishop. Now the knight can go there, and you could see just how the black minor pieces were tripping over each other to get space. And so it makes sense, but the problem is that you gave up a little bit too much to try and make this happen, and it gives me a perfect opportunity to strike on the queen side with b4. And now with b4, you could see my pawns are starting to march, because now the knight, again, the knights are kind of clumsy fighting for the same squares. Now this knight gets to go to a6, not a desirable square. And now I go c4. And look, all of a sudden my pawns are beautiful here. They're just wonderful, wonderful structure here. Black's pawns are less so. Just 3 pawns to work with. And, let me get rid of these. And the other thing that's disconcerting is this queen on b5 is just wonderfully placed, just really, really nicely placed to help support the pawn push, to stop black from pushing their own pawn because the a6 knight is hanging. So just a lot of things going in white's direction here, and I felt very good about my position. So black played f5, trying to get some counterplay, and I went rook ac1. Just trying to get out of the way of that screaming bishop on the diagonal. It actually turns out that rook ac1 was a slight mistake, and it would have been better to just push forward with c5. The point is that if d takes c5, which is the natural move, I actually have d6, a really, really wonderful breakthrough based on the fact that this b7 pawn is hanging. So after queen takes d6, bishop takes b7, not only are both rooks under siege, but now this knight on a6 is also hanging, and I'm gonna just win material. Hey, I didn't go for it, and rook ac1 is a very natural move to make because you're just getting out of the fire of the piece. c5 is still a legitimate threat, and I still hold all my trumps. But yeah, c5 was the better move. Now e4 was played, and e4 makes sense. I mean, now the point is that my bishop on g2 is shut down temporarily, and now this knight is trying to get a square on e5. So really interesting ideas there. But I played f4, and the point was that I'm not going to allow this knight to get to e5, and I wanted to shut that down. And just see I'm taking control on both sides of the board. I'm trying to take up space. The only real piece that's doing much work is this bishop on g7, but now that I put my rook away, it's kind of hitting air on that diagonal. So bishop fa was played, trying to deal with the c5 break, and I went knight b3, again, just trying to bring another piece towards c5, try and reinforce it. Also looking at the e6 square, which looks really, really juicy. Rook a b8 was played. Unfortunately, a blunder, because now the a7 pawn is hanging, so I just took it. And black just has to go back, sadly. And then I just went back to e3. So you might say, wow, just blundering a pawn. How does a master do that? Well, this master is in a very, very heavy time trouble. I think I was up like 40 minutes at this juncture, and I felt pretty good here. I'm a pawn up. I have the two bishops. I have this amazing pawn storm, controlling both sides of the board, equals a winning position. So queen d8 was played. And now I went knight d4, putting my knight on e6, and this is like a dream position for me because I'm controlling both sides of the board beautifully. Knight f6 was played. Queen a4. Why queen a4? You might say, well, I wanted to, keep pushing my pawns, but I also thought my queen on, b5 had done its job, and I wanted to relocate to the b3 square where I thought that I might be doing excellent work on that diagonal. So that was the idea there, is that I really want to play c5, but this knight on f6 is sort of keying on the pawn on d5. So I really want to get my queen there to defend it. So queen e7, queen b3, like I said, shifting the queen so that it's, again, eyeing this king on this diagonal and reinforcing the e6 square. Knight h5, hitting my pawn on g3. Bishop f2, just defending it. Why not? Bishop g7, and now knight e6. And again, just taking over on both sides. Note that knight e6 also has the benefit of protecting the f4 pawn. So if I want to play g4 and harass the knight on h5, I also have that option. So knight c7, challenging my knight. I played knight takes g7. Why not? Bishops are better than knights typically, and that bishop on g7 was the most active piece that black had, so getting rid of it is fine with me. Knight takes g7, and now bishop g4, my bishop d4. Now that bishop on g7 is gone, why not take the diagonal for myself? Knight e8, and again, notice here after knight e8 that look at how the knights are fighting over the same squares. That's what happens when you lack space. The minor pieces become really superfluous. So just something to keep in mind is, when you lack space, you really want to try to trade some minor pieces because these types of things can happen. Bishop f1, just relocating and still preparing for the c5 break. Another theme is when you're better or even close to winning, you don't want to rush because black's already playing from an inferior position. So a lot of times, you can sort of win without doing anything because they'll kind of fall on their sword and make more mistakes. So I was kind of waiting for another mistake almost. Knight f6, and now c5 I was really ready for, because if knight takes d5, I have this bishop c4 pin. So knight a6 was played, and now c6. And now I'm just sort of ramming further up the board. And again, note that if b takes c6, d takes c6 comes with check, and this king is under fire, and just everything is collapsing because now I have 3 pawns that can sort of scream up the board with decisive effect. And so, yeah, just a tough position. So after c6, actually, black called off the fight and resigned here because the writing is on the wall. There's really no counterplay. Wow, so I was very, very happy, relieved a little bit with this game. When you have such a bad start, it's just nice to win a game again, because it's like, just to remember what that feeling is like, it's just really important. So I was glad to get this win. Still not a great tournament for me. I'm on 2.5 out of 5 after the win, but at least being back on 50%, I still have 4 rounds to go. A lot of things could happen. So really, really happy with the result, and I really want to take that energy into the next round. So yeah, it's feeling good. anyways, thanks for watching. If you like what you saw, please comment, ask questions, things like that. And please consider supporting the Grandmaster journey by, donating or providing support in the link in the description below. With that, I'll leave you, and next time I'll go over round 6. Thanks for watching. Take care.